Hello everyone, is the Prophet Michael David, aka Aries, and today I'm going to teach you how to make a spreadsheet that plays the Collatz games just like I did, and that way you can test it out if you want to. Alright, real quick before we start, my next video is going to be on the current building war between men and women, because that's been popping up on my YouTube a whole lot. And because of who I am and my background and what happened to me, I have a pretty unique stance on this that will hopefully help both sides out. Um, Plus, I have this. But today is not about that. Today is going to be about how to make a spreadsheet that plays the Collatz game. So here we go. Okay. Before we start here, we got to do a little bit background about what type of things in the spreadsheet functions that we're actually using. And we're only using three, really, but we're abusing the same thing over and over. In what type of spreadsheet? I'm using Apple's numbers, but the equations should work the same in Excel. The function should be almost identical, or any other spreadsheet. So what three functions are we using? Well, number one, we're going to use something called a floor function. A floor function, and all a floor function is always round down. So if you can floor function any number, and so if you floor function 3.1, it becomes 3. 3.2 becomes 3. 3.9 becomes 3. It's always round down, and you can round down to tens, but floor function is really known for rounding down to the nearest whole number. All right, the second one is we're going to use an if statement. And all that is exactly what it sounds like. It's the same in programming, but it's in the spreadsheet. So you have some condition. If this happens, then print out this or make this calculation. But if that does not happen, then do this. And sometimes it's kicking out zeros, or sometimes you can tell it to do another function or type out something else. And then the third one is the ifs, which is just a combination of if statements. So if this happens, do this. 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 You make it as long as you want to. And then at the end, if none of those conditions are satisfied, then it kicks out a zero. So those are the three things that we're going to be using to make the spreadsheet. All right, we're going to do this column by column. So the 27, here I'll bring it up. The 27 with the black, rectangle around it. I just did that to highlight it. You use that cell and then you say save row, save column. So it's always taking that, and that's your seed number. That's you type in whatever number you want to play the game with into there. And then the very next column is called the game column. And then I'm going to show you the equation for that. But on the top, the first one on that game column, you just like equals whatever is in that box, because that's your seed number, and that's the number that you're starting out with. Okay, from here on out, even if you don't understand the words coming out of my mouth, I can assure you the equations in the screenshots work. So, and then like I said, on this one we're doing the game column. You can see that the one we're looking at for the equation is the 82 there, because the first one is just indexing the seed number. And that equation, is basically, the if b2 divided by 2 minus the floor of b2 divided by 2, comma 1 equals 0, then divide b2 by 2, otherwise multiply by 3 and add 1. I just read that out going across just like that. But what that's actually doing in layman's terms is that equation is looking at the number right above it. So the 82 is looking at 27, and it's saying, okay, I'm trying to figure out if you're odd or even, because I know the Collatz game that if you're odd, I 3x plus 1, and if you're even, I divide by 2. So I'm taking the number above me and I'm dividing by 2. Now I know if it's the even number and you divide by 2, it's still going to be a whole number. But if it's an odd number, it's going to be 0.5. So you're using that relationship that when you divide it by 2, if it's an even number, it's still going to be a whole number, and if it's an odd number, it's going to have 0.5. So you take that number, divide by 2, and then you subtract the floor function of that number. So if it's an odd number, the b divided by 2 will be like, let's say it's 7, it'll be 3.5, but the floor of that will be 3. And so when you subtract the 2, you'll have 0.5. And that'll happen every single time that it's an odd number. But an even number, the floor function won't do anything to it, so it'll come out 0. And so that's the mechanism that we're abusing over and over to figure out if it's odd after you do the operation, whether it's still odd or even. So in layman's terms, it would be if the number above me divided by 2 is odd, it's going to have or if it's even, then when I subtract the floor function, then it's going to equal 0, and therefore I know it's even, so divide by 2 again. But if it's odd, 3x plus 1. So I'm not going to go into as much detail as that one, but you guys can watch it over. And like I said, even if you don't understand the words, the equation itself will do the work correctly. And if you graph that game column as long as the game goes, and again, I've said this before, I used 27 because it's a notorious number. It's a small number, but it has a lot of steps, 111 steps altogether. But again, if you graph that column for whatever seed number you put in, that's the game graph that you will get out. And that's the more traditional way. They call it the hailstone numbers and everything. You can see how it goes up like hailstones and eventually falls to the earth. Watch the Veritasium video if you want to see screenshots or videos just like that, or graphs just like that. All right, so that's the screenshot and equation for the odd or even column. And as you can see, I just did the same exact thing, but when I knew it was even, just type out, in the quotations even, and it'll type out, you don't have to do an equation all the time. You can type out actual letters that are words that way. So all the equation is saying, again, do the floor function thing, and if it comes out even, then type even, and if it's odd, type odd, and that you get an entire column of evens or odds, so you can see the tendencies and how everything works out, which is important in seeing how the game does transition, or it's helpful at least. So then I had, a spreadsheet that plays the game and does an analysis in the traditional way, but I still had to make it so that I could do a mod analysis the way that I analyzed the problem. And I'd failed at this before, but the first thing I knew I needed to do was I used the exact same technique to find out which mod lines that the number that the game was playing fell on. And I knew it had to be on one of the 6 mod lines, so I just made 6 columns that were all like mod checks, and I'll display them all to you right now, but then I'm not going to explain. You should, by now, I've explained it twice. You could see it's the same mechanism I'm using to find out if the number that the game is playing with, it lies on that line, or which mod 6 line it lies on. All right, and now the hardest part. After I had those 6 columns of mod check lines, I need to be able to index those to find out and somehow print out, which mod line it was on. And to do that, you have to use an ifs statement, like I said before, where it's not just if or this. It's if this happens, this, if this happens, this, if this happens, this, if this happens, this. So I made an if statement that in layman's terms here, and I'll show it to you right next though and everything, basically says if the 1 mod 6 line is a whole number, then type out 1 mod 6. If the 2 mod 6 is a whole number, then type out 2 mod 6, if etc., etc. That's all I'm doing, and this is what the equation looks like. Okay, almost done. So that's how you get the mod line graph that tells you which mod line that your number lies on. But to actually to graph it, you can't do it with like, the word 3 mod 6 or whatever. So I had to do one more ifs statement abusing the same technique to get numbers out that I could use for the actual graph. And this is the equation. And finally, if you graph that column, then you will get the mod analysis graph that goes along with your traditional game graph. And again, this is for 27, and this is what the mod line graph looks like. And finally, if you do successfully make your own Collatz spreadsheet and start playing, number one, you'll start to see a whole lot of tendencies in games, but you'll also see that it always adheres to my algorithm, which I've showed you many times before, but I'll display it again right now. Play as much as you want, and the game will never violate that algorithm, which it's not quite proving. I mean, with those two things, you don't quite have enough information to fully prove the conjecture. Although you need to deal with the infinity issues on, are there any infinite 3x plus 1 only divided by 2 chains? No, I've described this before. But with those two pieces of information, the spreadsheet and the algorithm, like you can play enough games where you'll be like, yeah, this guy is correct. He definitely knows what he's doing. He definitely solved this thing. So, yeah, that's about it. And like I said, hopefully somebody will actually take the time to make their own or be interested enough to make their own. So, um, I hope you enjoyed it and you learned a little bit about floor functions and if statements and ifs statements as well, if you're into that stuff. So I'm going to sign off. As always, the two rules. Rule number one, do not touch other people without their consent, aka do not hurt each other. And rule number two, it's all about honesty. Lies are ticked down, aka try not to lie. All right. I love you all. I'll talk to you later.